Welcome to this session on the PRCA code for professional lobbying with Stuart Thompson, Dr. Stuart Thompson. I'm Louise Watham. I'm Head of Public Affairs at the PRCA, and I'll be lurking in the background while this session takes place just to answer any questions and be on hand as well. So whilst we wait for people to join, just to say that if you do have a question as we're going along, please put that in the Q&A and there'll be time at the end. We'll have some time at the end to go through those questions. So please do put any questions you have in the Q&A as we go along. Also, importantly, we are recording the session today and that will be made available to everybody. So if you have any colleagues who can't attend today, we'll send a link on supporting materials that we send out after the session. So we'll send those materials across to you. Okay, I think that's everything from me. I will pop my camera off and pass over to Stuart.
Brilliant. Thanks, Louise. That's very kind. And welcome everybody today. I'm hoping everybody can hear me okay. If you could just let us know in the chat that that's all right, that would be fantastic. I too will turn off my camera in a second. I normally just put it on at the start just so that everybody knows that this isn't some, I'm not some glorified AI chatbot type thing, that it is a real person. So when your questions do come in during the session, or indeed we'll have some time at the end as well, that therefore they are being answered by real people, not just some sort of automated AI. So let me turn off the video. There we go. Then you don't have to put up with me. So thank you. Thanks for coming. Look, we've got about an hour today. So what I'm going to do in that hour is talk a little bit about the role of ethics in lobbying, consultant lobbying, public affairs. We call it various things, but it sort of focuses on the same sort of work. We'll talk a bit about that. Obviously, we'll concentrate on the code for professional lobbying as the PRCA's code, and we'll talk a bit about statutory registers as well. And just as a little thing, just as something I want to flag right at the start, is that whilst today we talk, most detail about the code for professional lobbying that we have in place at the PRCA, we do also have a PRCA code of conduct, which is the sort of, if you like, the overarching code for everybody that's a member of the PRCA. And then if you do public affairs, professional lobbying, consultant lobbying, it's the professional code that applies to us as individuals as well. So hopefully that makes sense. So there are two codes that we have that you have to take notice of. Now I'll see if the slides will work. Come on, there we go. Right, thank you. We look as an industry profession, whatever we want to call ourselves. The reality is we don't always have the best reputation in the world, and you can go back in time. You can look more recently, and issues, allegations come up about that relationship between lobbying and politics and politicians and political parties. Now, we used to be the previous Public Affairs Board, Public Affairs Code. We updated that. We updated that because, well, a number of reasons, but hopefully to make it sort of clearer and easier to understand, as we'll talk about, and I'll go through some of the main provisions in a second as well, so that you're aware of them. Not everything, because that would make it for a fairly tedious hour, but I'll go through some of the main points. But also as a way to help maintain trust in our profession. And, that link between, good reputation of ourselves and our clients and our organizations and, good and effective engagement is pretty fundamental. That power of reputation is not just about, I don't think, just good business practice, which I fundamentally believe that it is, but it's also what's expected of other professions, lawyers, accountants, etc. But when you look internally as well, if you work in-house, and of course, one of the main, I suppose, key differences between, again, we'll talk about the statutory lobbying in a second, but one of the main key differences between, what's expected at Westminster at statutory level, so the law, and what the PRCA codes do is that it covers both. I'm a consultant lobbyist. I run my own consultancy, but equally for many of you on the call today, you will probably work in-house as well, and the code applies to you as well. So whether we're looking at what our clients expect as a consultant or whether we look at what our colleagues expect in an in-house role, they will expect certain standards as well. So, if your colleagues in other teams have to adhere to certain standards, if they're lawyers or accountants, whatever, why shouldn't the same be applied to you as well as lobbyists and public affairs professionals as well? And it might also be that those that you work with, in that broader sort of supply chain, if you like, also expect certain standards, as well. So that piece around reputation is good for colleagues, clients, but also, frankly, when we try and engage with, politicians, but civil servants as well, they need to have faith and understanding in the way that we behave, as well. So that PRCA, the code, I think is a stamp of approval. It's a quality mark. Some may use that to attract new business, if they want to do that and sort of show that they're different from sorry, I was going to say the opposition, sorry, didn't quite mean like that. Your competitors, I should say, sorry. They can do that as well, but because you adhere to the code. So what we talk about today is about knowing your role, the behaviours expected, and sort of what happens if something goes wrong, as well. And I say the reality is that, in the past, um, there have been some pretty egregious poor behaviours. So if you go back to the time of, the John Major government and the Conservative governments of the sort of, the 1990s, you had Mohammed Al Fayed, then owner of Harrods, chairman of Fulham Football Club, father of Dodi Al Fayed. Now, subsequently, we know that, and I should probably choose my words carefully, but not a very nice person and lots of allegations, about him and his behaviours as well. But at the time, chairman of Fulham Football Club, etc., etc., there were court cases, and he paid politicians to undertake activity in Parliament. So, there were court cases. That's a matter of public record. But then move into the new shiny new Tony Blair, new Labour years, and you have a guy called Derek Draper. Derek Draper used to work for the Labour Party, then joined a lobbying firm, and within a matter of sort of weeks of New Labour coming to government, you have, I think it was the Observer front page there, which I've got. There are 27 people in this new Labour government, and I know all of them. So very much trying to sell a sort of an insider little black book style of lobbying, where you pay me and I just get you to the right people, sort of thing. And as a result of those pretty egregious, examples, a voluntary code came about through the APPC. And the APPC was created, again, just to show that the industry was taking action. That you could see who the firms worked for. There were clear requirements about not exchanging money with politicians. So those sort of things. So that may seem pretty fundamental, but at the time was maybe sadly in some ways, but was pretty revolutionary and was absolutely required. But look, I challenge you, if you tell anybody nowadays that what you do for a living, if you say you are a lobbyist, then invariably people will have inaccurate ideas about what that means, and they'll just say, well, it's about brown envelopes and shake hand. And that is not the case. That is absolutely not the case. But that public perception still remains. So we have to continuously try and counter that, those misunderstandings about what it is we do and how we behave and how we deal with political audiences, as well, I think. And that is part of the role of the PRCA itself. Now, I've been doing, lobbying a very long time, 25 plus years, both in-house and as a consultant as well. I run my own business, etc., etc. But in that time, we've also sort of slightly muddied the water, I guess, in the sense that we don't tend to use the L word anymore. We don't tend to call ourselves lobbyists. We tend to call ourselves, public affairs consultants or those sort of things. Now, again, I don't have a particular, you know, I don't care one way or the other, really. But lobbying, I suppose, used to be seen as much more around parliament and parliamentary activity, whereas public affairs is about more about that broader range of skills that we now have to deploy, a broader range of communications channels that we might work with. We're still fundamentally trying to, impact on public policy. We're still trying to influence public policy for our clients or for the communities our clients serve, or if we're in house, for the membership as we're a member organisation, or whatever it happens to be. But that's still what we're trying to do, and I don't think that bit doesn't vary or doesn't change with the title that we happen to sort of give ourselves. And I would also contend, I hope I mean, it's worth reflecting, but hopefully nobody on the call today, needs this sort of gone through a great deal of detail. But it works for government. Good lobbying, good engagement helps with the operation of government. Yes, it's good for our businesses, and it creates understanding and helps knowledge. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do is make sure that government, in that broader setting, and I don't mean just the government and the main political party or anything like that. This is all levels of government. This is anybody involved in decision making, so opposition parties, etc. We're trying to make sure that they have the knowledge and understanding and data and evidence and insight and case studies, all the stuff that you bring, your clients, your organizations bring, to make sure that government operates effectively. And in that sense, you don't have to take my word for that. When the then government were consulting on introducing a statutory code for lobbying, and again, we'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a second, in the consultation paper, they said lobbying serves an important function in politics. By putting forward the views of stakeholders to policymakers, it helps in the development of better legislation. So, in effect, without that insight and data and evidence and what you bring, governments can make mistakes. They pass laws with unintended consequences. They don't really understand the full impact of what it is they're doing. Not because they're deliberately making mistakes, or it's the cock up, not the conspiracy. Excuse me, but I always believe it's not that they're setting out to do any of these things deliberately. It's because they're making completely rational decisions as they would see it, but on the basis of partial information. So we have to make sure that it's not partial. We have to make sure that they have a much fuller picture, and that is part of what we are doing. I think anyway. And you can put in the chat if you agree or disagree with that. I think that's fine. So look, what is the sort of the PRCA's view, and how do we progress these things? So look, those that have signed up are around 140 organisations. Majority are in consultancies, but we've got in-house teams and individual members as well. So that's everybody that's covered by the code. I mean, the PRCM should be even broader than that, but this is for the public affairs side of things. We've got over 2,300 practitioners, 3,000 clients on the register for professional lobbying. So there is a quarterly register. Again, I'll go through this in a second in a bit more detail. But this is effectively overseen by the Public Affairs Board, and I would encourage you, each individually or as organisations, there is a Public Affairs Board. There are elections to those boards. Louise will correct me. I can't remember when the next lot. I think we've only just had one actually. But anyway, look, but to keep an eye on that. And if you want to get involved in helping, shape public affairs and the work of the PRCA, then I would encourage you to think about standing for election to the Public Affairs Board. Because that helps us promote the standards, it helps support professional development, it helps raise the profile and understanding and all those sort of things as well. So it's a really important part of what the PRCA does and what public affairs does as well. And then we've got a next gen group as well. Sadly, I'm much too old for the next gen group, so we'll move swiftly on from that as well. But we also have, alongside that, a a standards committee. And one of the changes, I suppose, or one of the things that we try to make much clearer is that, if there are problems, if there are issues for breaches, potential breaches, allegations of breaches, or whatever, of the code, then we have a standards committee which stands apart. So it's not run, there aren't PRCA sort of team members that do that. It stands apart from the organisation as a whole to give it a degree of independence, which I think is really important. So to look at challenges that come through, that look at allegations of, or reports of, I was going to say code misconduct or potential code misconduct. So that means that a majority of its members, including the chair, are from outside the industry. So it's a different pair of eyes. This isn't the industry constantly marking its own homework. This is people from outside looking at the challenges that come through. They're responsible for the codes of conduct and the code for professional lobbying. So they look at the cases that come through. And they also look at the procedure if complaints come through, how it's to be investigated. And if the worst comes to the worst and, there is a complaint, they will work out and that complaint is proven, then there's a sanction as well. And it's up to that standards committee. But I say, because it sits away, because it has that external perspective, I think that's a really strong part that we can all be rightly proud of. I'll come back to that in a second. That's fine. Look, you say we had a previous code. So the code for professional lobbying replaces the previous public affairs code. And again, I'll go through some of the main differences between the two, as well. And I think one of those points that I would absolutely raise sort of now is that one of the big changes was that, well, look, first of all, I think it's a high standard and it covers a number of ethical obligations, as you would hopefully rightly expect, about acting with honesty and integrity and not misleading, avoiding conflicts of interest, maintaining confidentiality. And I think those are all pretty much mainstays of any good, code of conduct for any profession, frankly, as well. But one of the changes that we made, well, sorry, and this was following a consultation, I hasten to add. So this wasn't, the PRCA, again, marking its own homework. There was a consultation amongst the profession as a whole, and members, and they came back with these changes. One of those was, if members become aware of what they think might be a breach of the code, they have a responsibility to report that now, as well. So that's one of the main changes. Clearer language. I think it's easier to understand than the old one. I think some of the old one was, if I'm being, hopefully I'm not being rude about anybody or anything when it was written, but it was very much written on the basis of the old APPC coming together with the existing board for the PRCA and the merging, and they created the Public Affairs Board from that. And I think, when two organisations come together, there's a degree of what can be agreed amongst those members at that time. That was quite a long time ago, so the new code doesn't quite have that sort of hangover of two organisations having to come together. We could look at it afresh, so it's clearer, and I think then that's easier. One of the things that does not has not changed, is the very clear requirement not to employ MPs and peers, but something that's, as I suppose, emerged in recent years, which wasn't around when the original code was written, was about non-exec directors in lobbying roles. So the new code picks up on that, as well. There are fewer rules as well. We're going to, again, I think that helps with the level of clarity. And again, additional emphasis on transparency. Transparency was always there, but I suppose we've tried to be more challenging of the sector as a whole to think about, okay, where do we think that because the old code was written a number of years ago, so with the newer code, are there new ways that we need to think about transparency and make that clearer as well, because this new code only came into effect just at the back end of last year. So we're not even a year old in terms of that code. Um, Transparency, um, it applies equally to whether we're clients or employees. Again, whether we are in-house or consultants. And also, again, this doesn't change from the old one, whether we are the client in that sense is paying fees or not. So what does that mean? It means that let's say you're doing a piece of free work, pro bono, whatever phrase we might use, but you are still acting as a professional lobbyist. You are still, giving them advice, engaging. Whether there's money changing hand or not does not change that fact. And again, that's the truth. And it's also a living code. So whilst we've just talked about how some of these ways that we've changed it, we will continue to change it as well. So as new issues come to light, as new challenges emerge, then we may well consult again, and we may well look at that at the code again in future as well. So I say there are only 8 actually, so I suppose I do go through most of them to be fair with you. But I mean, let's pick up on a few. Uh, let's pick up on a few of the main points here. So clause 8, for instance, of the code states that members are required to familiarise themselves with the provisions of the code, and company members must provide access to training to ensure their employees and contractors are aware of and understand the provisions of this code. So it's a much clearer call for people to do this training, other training, but also, as I would say here, is look, the code isn't very long. Um, Hopefully, I give you a flavour today of what you need to think about, the challenges that we may face, but equally, everybody should look at the code, read the code, familiarize yourself with it as well, because we are all responsible, in effect, for the execution of that code. And as I mentioned, because one of the newer provisions or the newer provisions of the code are about calling out bad practice when we see it, again, that reinforces that requirement for each of us individually to really know and understand it. So after today, click on it. I'm sure Louise will put a link in shortly as well. Have a look at it, familiarize yourself, and just look at it every now and again. Do the training every now and again. It might be that nothing's changed, in which case that's fine. It's just a reminder. Or it might be, let's say, since the back end of last year, there have been some pretty fundamental changes to it as well. Secondly, an entry for the Public Affairs Register every 3 months, with the previous 3 months lobbying activity as well. So I suppose the register is one of the main ways that we deliver that transparency. So if you go onto the PRCA site, and Louise has just very kindly put in the code there as well as we were talking about that, as the register. So if you go onto the PRC website, or anybody externally goes onto the PRC website, you can look at the register and see who's been working for who. That's a pretty fundamental part. And of course, organisations have to fill it in. Now, I would also just say that it's important for an organisation to take that seriously. Again, sorry, that sounds really simplistic, but sometimes, or there could be, and there have been examples in the past where some information has been put onto the register that wasn't entirely accurate. Not because anybody was trying to do anything underhand or anything silly along those sorts of lines. It's just that the person giving responsibility for filling in the register in that particular instance just put in sort of the whole of the team as they saw it, but actually there were members of the team that weren't doing lobbying work, professional lobbying work, public affairs work, and therefore it looked like for that particular firm at the time, there was somebody they worked with who was a politician. They weren't involved in the public affairs work because we had to check that to make sure, obviously. But it looked like they were because they'd been included in the list. Now they weren't, but just because that list hadn't been checked, that entry hadn't been sort of properly checked. So again, we all have a responsibility just to make sure that the returns are accurate, I suppose is what I'm trying to say there as well. And then, as I've already mentioned, there is a complaints procedure uh, for the code of conduct, and then a standards committee can look at issues that come up. Um, there we go. And again, link there from Louise has put in. So I suppose fundamentally, look, what is professional lobbying? Sorry, I've gone on for sort of 25 minutes, and now we get through to the definition. So the definition means activities which are carried out in the course of business for the purpose of influencing or advising others how to influence the public functions of a sorry, it's easier to understand than read out apparently. Functions of a relevant public body. So what does that mean? That means influencing means informing, advising, advocating for a particular point of view. So trying to have that impact we talked about. And a relevant public body, central government, devolved government, local government, ministers, officials, special advisors, elected members, their staff, and the bodies that have a public function. So regulators, people along those sorts of lines would be covered by that relevant public body. And I think again, it's important that we recognise that, and this is one of the changes. Look, when I started doing this, there was only one parliament. It was in Westminster, and Scotland and Wales, in that sense, didn't exist. Obviously, they did exist. I hasten to add. I went to a Scottish university, so I definitely know it exists. But politically, in terms of devolution, there was no Scottish Parliament, no Welsh Parliament, Senate, etc. We didn't have mayors, etc. All of those things very much change, and just making sure that we are suitably broad in those audiences that are part of those bodies as well. So if you're doing anything along those sorts of lines, covering those public bodies and trying to influence, that counts as professional lobbying. So I say a few of those to go through. Look, you have to disclose the identity of your client. On or whose behalf you're making representations upon first contact with a relevant public body, and of course that includes all those special advisors, MPs, MSPs, etc., as well. And why is that important? Well, it's important because look, let's say MP for the sake of argument, if you work for a particular sector or they've had particular experience of that sector or or firm before, that may impact on whether they want to talk to you. So you can't sort of sidle up and say, well, I work for a whole range of different pharmaceutical companies, and what do you think about this? Actually, no, name them. You've got to tell the person you're trying to engage with who it is you work for, either as a consultant and it's your clients, or if you're in-house, as well. This is one of the things that's clearer here, which is we've got to advise clients or employer, if you're in-house, if the instructions will entail a breach of the code as well. So the PRCA code of conduct, the overall arching which I mentioned, or this code, the professional lobbying code. Why? Well, because not everybody is aware. Whereas, if they're basically asking you to do something that's unethical, they may not know it's unethical. I hasten to add, it's not them deliberately trying to do something, but we have to call that out. So again, our knowledge and understanding as individuals and our role in that is of fundamental importance. We don't make exaggerated or misleading statements about our influence or access to relevant public bodies or individuals. So we're not selling a sort of a little black book style, public affairs, i.e. a la Derek Draper all those years ago. Of course, you can talk about knowing and understanding government regular engagement. That's fine, because that's all about showing that you know and understand, the department that your client wants to work with, or your employer wants to work with. But we're not saying, don't worry, I know Keir, he pops around at the weekend for a barbecue and and a beer, and we watch the football together, and I can have a chat with him. Just to be absolutely clear, none of that is true, by the way. Just to, I don't want to be accused of anything bad. So, rule 4. Now, the rule 4, I think, is one of the really important changes here. So again, when you're looking at the code afterwards, pay particular attention to rule 4, um, because it covers the non-exec directors of government departments, which is a relatively new role. Um, and that the idea of a relevant role, um, so that could be, for instance, if you were a councillor, but that means an extra sort of requirement on the declaration. So when you're filling in that, or your employer or you are filling in that quarterly return, you must be clear on that relevant role part. So when I look at, to just, I suppose, to use an example, if it was me filling in, I'm not a local councillor, I hasten to add, but if I were to fill in that thing, I would say, Stuart Thompson, Councillor Thompson of, um, Barnet Council, which is where I live, and the name of the ward. The same would apply if you're a candidate or if you hold a role in your local political party. And again, this isn't to try and catch anybody out. This is not to say that anybody is, trying to sidle their way up the political party or whatever it happens to be. What it is, it's about transparency. So again, anything that's not clear on that, Louise is always available. The PRCA is always available. So if anybody is at any doubt, any organisations are in any doubt about how to sort of declare that relevant role, then absolutely, get in contact, and we're here to help. They are here to help. We are all here to help. We're all friendly people. 5, members must avoid actual or apparent conflicts of interest. Excuse me. Between basically what you do in your personal affairs and what you do in a professional capacity. Why? Because look, sometimes it can be that you're having a conversation about, you'll get, look, speaking frankly, some of us are, I don't know, I'll never can never quite tell whether I'm a geek or a nerd or whatever, or maybe both or neither. But lots of people are. In other words, we do this job because we enjoy politics. We like politics. We find it interesting, and therefore we are often involved in party politics as well. And that's absolutely fine. But let's say, for instance, that you go to an event that's a party event, a dinner, something like that, and you happen to be sitting beside an MP or a minister or something like that. You could be having a very nice chat with them about all things about, I don't know, football and local and whatever it happens to be. And then suddenly that conversation moves into a discussion about something you work on because it's it's an issue that you feel passionate about potentially. Um, that is fine, but you have to make it clear that you have then moved into a discussion of which you have an interest in that sense. So it's not that you can't talk to anybody about these things. It's just you have to make it clear that that nature of that conversation, I suppose you could say, has altered and changed and taken you into that professional role. These sort of circumstances change. So this is how you deal with it. Rule 6, members must not hold a pass conferring access to Westminster devolved institutions, etc. There are occasional exceptional circumstances, often sometimes to do with childcare and things like that. But if there are decisions like that, then they're made available on the PRCA website. But again, as a general rule of thumb, you don't have a parliamentary pass. 7, members must provide the following information to the PRCA register. We've talked about some of the requirements there, and you have to familiarise yourself. Sorry, my slide's gone slightly wonky there. I will rectify that at some point. Apologies. Familiarise yourself with the provisions of the code, and companies have to provide access to training as well. So, hence what these sorts of sessions. So, but we are the PRCA. We are voluntary. It's a voluntary code. And obviously it applies only to those members. There will be member organisations, firms, individuals that aren't covered. Well, obviously we'd like them to be covered. We'd like more people to join the PRCA, of course. We are a membership body. We'd like to have that. But we have to recognise that, some people choose not to join. But what none of us have a choice. Sorry, I'm trying to mangle my phrase here, and apologies. What I mean is there are statutory requirements as well, i.e. laws. We have to apply by the laws, and that applies to all of us. Primarily, the one that we have most notice of, and I'm talking Westminster here, we'll come on to Scotland and Wales in a second, but anyway, is around the Transparency of Lobbying Act. Now, there is always lots of chat about how good or bad this particular act is. Um, it was set up by David Cameron when he was Prime Minister because he claimed that lobbying was going to be the next big political scandal. That was before he was the next big political scandal by doing, you could argue, lobbying for Lex Greensill and trying to get him in front of the Treasury and texting Rishi Sunak, etc., etc. But the reality was that under the act that he set up, that he didn't do anything wrong, and I make that very clear because he was in-house, not a consultant lobbyist, and it only covers work around direct communication with ministers or permanent secretaries. So therefore, and you have to be, as I say, a consultant lobbyist. So the Act, in effect, there are one or two little exceptions, but in effect, don't cover in-house. They only cover consultants. So if you are in-house and you employ consultants, it would apply to them, but it doesn't apply to you. So as a consultant lobbyist, I could do exactly the same work as an in-house professional. If I wear one hat, it counts. If I wear another hat, it doesn't count. So what Cameron did, if I'd have done it as a consultant lobbyist, would have breached the guidelines because I didn't declare it. Whereas he, because he was in-house, it didn't declare it anyway. So there have been some tightening of the rules around APPG secretariats and what they call incidental lobbying, which is around information that's gathered. But in effect, the Act hasn't really changed for now 10 years. And both ourselves and, to be fair, the CIPR as well have called for changes to be made to the legislation so it is clearer for all of us. Having said that, that's Westminster, and you can question how good or bad that is. But then Scotland has a lobbying act as well, and that's generally perceived to be a clearer and better code. It's clearer about its face-to-face interaction, and there's a list of different audiences, everything, and it applies whether you're in-house or consultant lobbyist as well. And unlike the Westminster version, where to be on the register, you have to pay you have the privilege of paying a large sum of money to be on that register. The Scottish one is free. So again, there's arguably more incentive to be clearer. I'm not saying you wouldn't do it because obviously you'd break the law, etc. But there'd be more incentive to be even more full in your transparency. Sorry, I've mangled my words here in the Scottish one. Anyway, it's clearer, it's easier. And the PRCA, Public Affairs Board as well, talk to Westminster and Hollywood regularly about that. And I know just recently Louise and the team had meetings with the Ethics Commissioner and things like that as well. So this is an ongoing dialogue. And it may well be that parliamentary rules, which some have changed, may well change that, as well. I'll ignore these. This is just some more information if you think. But again, look, familiarize yourself with those requirements, especially if you're a consultant lobbyist in Westminster. I think one of the key points here is that, and sorry, just to finish on this little section, the Synnath in Wales, the Standards Committee have looked at this, and I'm pretty sure they haven't yet come out with their report, but I haven't checked recently. But they don't have a code or a statutory lobbying register as yet, but I would imagine that will come at some point. I think that will just be a case of when. And obviously, if you're in Brussels, again, codes. And if you're in America, Canada, they all have requirements as well. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is the PRCA is the voluntary bit, but wherever you are doing your public affairs, your consultant lobbying, whichever term you is relevant to the jurisdiction, there may well be laws. And of course, if you are involved in things like, I don't know, pharma or financial services, etc., there are also other rules and statutory regulations as well. Again, as an individual, you have to be aware of all those things. Sorry, I'm making this sound hugely complicated, and it's not. But what I am saying is, depending on the nature of your work and where you're doing it, just make sure that you are following all the relevant laws, and then you're the voluntary ones as well if you're members. Um, Now, of course, we'd all rather that we didn't have to do any of this stuff in the sense that, it was all very clear, and, breaches didn't happen. But the reality is that, breaches do happen. And there are investigations, and the standards committee will take a look at, issues that come up that are referred to them as, as well. Um, so it's important that, these codes are in place to help us all manage our work and give us a good understanding. Um, uh, and where there is poor behavior, it can be called out and can be dealt with. That's important. Um, but the reality is that, all of this is an ongoing process for all of us all the time. And um, we have to reassure ourselves, our clients, and the public as well. Sorry, public as well. There are no getting away with that. There have been some major scandals, whether it's, Bell Pottinger or whatever it happens to be. So we have to make sure that ethics are ingrained in all of our actions as well. And I suppose, just to be completely clear, is that when you join the public affairs, when you join the PRCA and you do public affairs work, you are automatically, effectively enrolled, in that sense, in the under the terms of the public affairs code, the professional lobbying code, and it covers individuals as well as organisations and in-house as well. And I think what I would just say to you is, if you're not, because of that individual role, because of all of responsibilities, if you are not clear, so if you see what you think of as might be an issue that's coming to pass. So let's say that there was a piece of work that, an organisation started and, wasn't focused on politicians, but takes on a more political dimension, or is focused on, a planning decision or something along those sort of lines. And because of your knowledge and understanding of the code, you think, actually, I think that's become, a bit of lobbying work here, and therefore relevant to the code. Do you know who to talk to internally? Because it may be that other colleagues that from other departments don't really understand these things. Why would they, if they're not involved in the PRCA directly or in public affairs? So do you know who it is that you talk to internally to chat these things through, to maybe rectify an issue before it becomes an issue? So again, I think that's part of what we have to do as well. Look, a couple of other little pieces that come up. One's often around party conferences as well. Do you go on a member pass or a corporate pass? Now, it might depend on which which hat you're wearing. If I put it like that. But if you do go on a party pass, then if it does move from your sort of personal life into your professional life, as I mentioned earlier, that conversations, engagement you have on that professional capacity, you make sure that you tell people. So you might even refer to it. You might say, look, I'm here as a member of this particular constituency or branch or whatever, but actually I'm talking to you because I'm doing work on this and that. So you can go on a member pass, but you have to be super clear about what it is you're doing there and what the conversations are happening as well. So that's all the slides. I wanted to just run. I've got about 15 minutes, so I've got about sort of 10 minutes or so to run through a couple of scenarios. So this is where I look for everybody that's to be active and engaged. Oh, so now my watch talks to me as well. That's very good. So I'm going to go through a couple of scenarios, and if you can tap in to the chat what your reaction is to that and how you would deal with that, that would be fantastic. Again, but also think about questions that you want to ask as well. We haven't had any so far. I don't think nothing's come through on the chat, but feel free to put questions in. So look, let's start with scenario one. I've got loads of scenarios, so we're not going to get through them all. So don't worry about that. That's fine. I will stick to the hour that we have. So after winning a highly competitive pitch process, a new client who works in a controversial sector and has long had reputational challenges has suddenly become reticent about being listed on the public affairs register. They suggest various ways to get around it, such as the agency being paid by a subsidiary company to mask who's really paying the bills, or being subcontracted out by a PR company and not declaring the end client. As a potential account manager, what should your approach be, and what should you say to the client? I will take a quick swig of coffee whilst I wait for everybody to type stuff into the chat and reactions into the chat. How would you deal with that as an account manager? Uh, yep, Louise. Red flags. Red flag. Well, yeah, red flags, blue flags, flags generally. Anybody else? Anybody? Any other thoughts? Tom, thank you. Proposed approach would be reputationally damaging for the client and the consultancy. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, Tom. Definitely. Um, Sally, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. So look, yeah, lots of now comments coming through. So, um, look, I mean, frankly, not acceptable. Not acceptable. Um, the idea that you can sort of try and disguise it and cover up it goes against the whole strain of transparency, doesn't it? It's just completely counter to everything we've been sort of talking about for the last sort of three-quarters of an hour, 50 minutes. um it has to be declared. Now, of course, look, I appreciate that that can be difficult for consultancies to have that conversation. It may be the difference between getting that piece of work and not getting that piece of work. In theory, they could go to a non-PRCA member and not have to declare it. That sort of thing. I mean, it can be challenging, especially in the in a sorry, I was gonna make a slight point about the challenges involved in the profession at the moment in terms of work and things like that. But you know what I mean. Um, but also, I mean, I deliberately mentioned account manager here because, as an account manager, it may not be your place to have that conversation with the client directly. It may be that you have to work upwards. You have to rely on the account director or maybe a director of the business to sort of, reinforce the nature of the PRCA's code and the fact that this can't happen. So anything that looks like a lack of transparency such as this, Louis said it, red flags. Let's do another one. Alex Moore is a consultant. He has managed to get an invitation to a drinks reception in Parliament, which is being attended by a number of MPs and their researchers who have an interest in financial services. Alex has a number of banking clients and is keen to make an impression. In particular, he wants to speak to Chris Tompkins MP, chair of the Financial Services APPG, about his client Banks Are For You, whose chief executive has been criticised by the APPG following a rather large bonus distribution. How does Alex go about speaking to Chris Tompkins MP? So what should be the approach? So I still can't speak. Approach there. Again, let me just give you a few moments all to type comments into the chat. Any thoughts about that? Couple more comments here. Nathan, be 100% upfront about the capacity he is there in, i.e., who the client is. Robert, similar. Yeah, it should be open about who is he representing. Absolutely. Yeah, look, I'd agree with you both there. This is not, again, the code is not trying to prevent anybody from having those conversations. Frankly, if we can't talk to MPs, MSPs, Senate members, etc., MLAs, councillors, mayors, blah, 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 frankly, we might as well pack up and go home. We have to have those conversations. But what it is saying is that when you have that conversation, as both of you have said, you are clear in having that conversation. It could be that Chris Tompkins is absolutely fine about having that conversation, but equally, Chris Tompkins may think, actually, do you know what? I don't like that firm. I really don't like the way they do business. They're really not treating their customers very well. Therefore, I just don't want to talk. But they can make that. They can do that on the basis that you told them who you work for. So thank you for that. Yeah, no, I agree. Here's another one. Your consultancy runs a number of APPGs. This brings you into contact with a wide range of MPs and ministers. A colleague asks you to mention a client's issue unrelated to the work of the APPG. And I say APPG, so I'm being very Westminster focused. Apologies. This could be cross-party groups in Scotland and Wales as well. So what? Sorry, sorry, cutting across myself. Unrelated to the work of the APPG, so they can then follow up. What should you say? And would it make any difference if the issue was related to the work of the APPG? What do you think about that? How does that fit with you? What do you think there? Any thoughts on that one? Does it make a difference? Can it happen? How should you go about it? Louis, yeah. Makes no difference. Conversation can happen. Yeah, look, again, a few more comments along those sorts of lines. So, look, of course, you can have the conversation. It is absolutely fine. Again, as long as you're transparent who you're working for. Now, it's a different matter whether walking into I don't know, an APPG on telecoms and having a conversation about financial services is necessarily good or effective or will work. I mean, I think that's a different conversation altogether. But can you do it? Yes, you can, as long as you're clear about the client. What about this one? So you believe that having a pass uh, to the Parliament, whichever one it is, would help when organising the work of the APPG. The chair agrees and offers to help organise the application process. What should your approach be? So this one about parliamentary passes. Any thoughts on that? Oh, yeah. Look, crikey! I've been flooded with responses now on the chat. Yeah, an overwhelming no. I think that is in. Yeah. Okay. I think I've probably made that quite clear. Yeah. Look, the answer to that is no. I mean, you shouldn't even be asking the chair, etc. Now, let's say, for instance, the chair has suggested that you should have a pass because it helps and you need to get in an accident, those sort of things. Um, it could be that the chair themselves don't really understand the nature of the PRCA's code and the requirements on it. So actually, a polite, well, that's very kind, thank you very much, and then use that as an opportunity to talk about the code and ethics and the way, the ethical behavior that you undertake, would be entirely appropriate. We can't just expect others to know about it as well. I mean, we're learning about it today, or refreshing our knowledge. And again, I know the PRCA were in and around Parliament and Portcullis House yesterday, again raising the profile with politicians. We have to inform them as well, and this may be one opportunity to do that. Now, I'm conscious that it's 25 past. We've got about 5 minutes, but I wanted to give you time to put comments, thoughts, questions into the chat. So now is your opportunity. Anything that I haven't covered, anything that I've done badly, with a lack of clarity, anything along those sort of lines, now is your time to shout. As you are typing, what I would say to you is that again, I've already mentioned this, but the PRCA team is always happy to help. If you have questions about maybe a type of, or the nature of a piece of work, or how to do the listing, as I mentioned earlier, and the clarity about relevant roles, have a chat with Louise and the team. They're always happy to help because, um, you know, sometimes things aren't entirely, however well we think we've drafted it and however clear we think the code is, and the new stripped down sort of code, it doesn't matter. There will always be challenges and will always be things that people want to talk about. And Louise has just very kindly put her email address in there as well, so that you can get in contact if needs be. So let me stop talking for a second and allow you time to type. Thank you. And yeah, look, keep in contact. And any questions, come to us, and hopefully that's brought some of the code to life. So look, thank you very much for your time. and hope to see you soon. Thank you.